The massively diverse genre of racing games is split into three main categories: simulation, arcade, and the middle ground that has been dubbed Simcade. Having played all of these, I want to try and best explain the differences between each one, and also debunk some common misconceptions. First, I'll start with a brief overview of each, before moving on to some more in-depth comparison. So first up are arcade races. Now sometimes these games are very obviously arcades, for instance Mario Karts or other games where you're very obviously bending the laws of physics or in fantasy worlds. There are however quite a few arcade races on the market which do have very realistic graphics, accurate car models and some sort of physics. Don't be fooled by this though, as games such as The Crew 2 and Forza Horizon are absolutely arcade races. These games usually require little to no driving ability or previous experience to get going, and arcade races often have the biggest audience by quite a margin due to their inclusiveness and accessibility. As a result, they usually have a lot of content and depth, such as open worlds, maybe extensive campaign modes, and sometimes even a storyline. Arcade races are usually about the driving and less about the racing. Simulator racing games, however, are the polar opposite to arcade races. Racing sims take on a very focused approach to racing, sticking to real-life tracks and cars, and have a huge focus on physics. Sim racing is all about shaving the tiniest fractions of a second off a lap time and perfecting a very specific set of skills such as tyre and fuel management and clean racecraft. Sims often don't have the best graphics, career modes, or depth in their content, as the focus is solely on realism. Simcades are then a middle ground between the two. It's definitely a grey area, although they generally just mix features from simulators and arcades, as developers try to find the best of both worlds. Some games are much closer to either sims or arcades though, as some end up being simulators that are dubbed down a bit for accessibility, such as GT Sport, whereas others are arguably arcades which are given a slightly more focused approach, such as Project Cars 3. Simcades usually offers some sort of tyre and fuel models and have a strong multiplayer. They also often have a range of campaign type modes, although this will depend on the game. So who are these games for? Well, arcade races are generally the entry level for most people. They are designed to appeal and be fun for everyone, so even the most hardcore fans of first person shooters could probably still enjoy an arcade racer. Arcade is also the broadest category, with everything from Sonic All-Star Racing to The Crew 2. All arcades are meant to be playable on a controller as well, or even a keyboard and mouse if that's what you really want, which makes them incredibly accessible. There's not much else to worry about with concern to the car when you're driving in these types of games, as the focus is often diverted somewhat to something else, such as exploring an open world. Moving on to Simcades then, which is where a lot of people will go if they like arcades but want something a bit more realistic. You will have to say goodbye to vast open maps and a drift button, although you'll likely be able to venture into the worlds of racing lines and time management. Depending on what game you go for, you can get a very good campaign experience, maybe in something like F1 2020, or you could go for GT Sport and get an amazing online experience. Another appeal of Simcades is that you have the option to play them pretty seriously or quite casually. With the change of a few settings, you can go from having steering, braking and even racing line assists to being completely on your own in a reasonably realistic environment. Simcades also generally have pretty good support with force feedback wheels, which further allows players to enjoy the game on whatever level they want. Stepping all the way up to simulators though is where the racing is always serious. Sims will do anything possible to achieve ultimate realism, even if that is sometimes at the cost of a garbage campaign or some not too great graphics. As I said before, these games are very focused, so I definitely wouldn't recommend that you jump straight into sim racing, as it's not for everyone. Serious doesn't mean that they're not fun games though. While you won't see any neon lit racetracks or monster trucks, those with an acquired taste for racing games as such will find simulators just as fun as any other type of games. Another common misconception about simulators is that they are harder, which is generally not true. Sure, there are more complex physics models to handle, however remember that realism doesn't necessarily make things harder. Now of course iRacing is going to be harder than Mario Kart, however putting in a top 10 lap time on Assetto Corsa is going to be pretty much just as hard as putting in the same lap on F1 2020. Also, unlike arcade games, the differences between cars are massive, allowing you to feel exactly how each one transfers its weight through a corner based on really cool factors such as where the engine is or how much fuel is on board. The only big limitation of sim racing is the accessibility, which we'll move on to now. So, accessibility. Well, arcades are of course all-inclusive, as they're built to be played on controllers and usually released on multiple platforms. The same can usually be said about simcades. However, if you want to get properly into sim racing, then you will need a force feedback wheel. The other accessibility problem with sims is that you're going to really want to be on PC, as while Assetto Corsa is on console, that's about it. Some of the biggest simulator games at the moment are R-Factor 2 and iRacing, which are PC only. This is partly due to the limitations of console hardware. However, smaller developers also don't really want to have to optimise their game for 3 different platforms. Overall then, so if you want the ultimate casual experience, then arcade races are the one to go for. With the most freedom and the biggest player bases, they're the games that anyone can keep going back to. If you are already into racing games though, then a simulator might be your next step, allowing you to learn the ins and outs of all types of race cars on laser mapped circuits. Be aware though that you will need a force feedback wheel. If however you like the idea of sim racing but don't want near one-to-one realism, want to play casually or like arcades but are looking for something new, then Simcade games are the perfect choice. They have a decent level of realism which can always be adjusted, and while Simcades might not be quite as accurate as simulation games, they can be just as competitive. Finally, I thought I'd recommend some games in each category, and there'll be a link to some of these in the description. For arcade, I can really recommend The Crew 2. It has an absolutely amazing map covering the entire of the USA, and this has allowed for a huge array of racing with everything from aeroplanes to drift cars and even Formula 1. Forza Horizon is of course an absolute no-brainer if you're on Xbox or PC. It's got some of the best graphics of this generation and more than 450 cars. It also has a really cool seasons feature where the map changes every week to represent each season. Need for Speed Heat is also a solid option if you're looking for an arcade, with its main feature being its police. Heat also has some pretty amazing graphics and a day-night system that is to die for. Moving on to Simcade, where the 2 main games hogging the market are Gran Turismo Sport on PS4 and Forza Motorsport on Xbox and PC, and both of these games are very good. GT Sport offers hands down the best online racing system we've seen in Simcades for a while. There are scheduled races pretty much every 10 minutes, so you can always have a guaranteed full lobby. Forza Motorsport 7 on the other hand has a very good offline campaign mode, offering loads of cool events where you can drive unique cars such as buggies and NASCARs. If you're looking for an alternative though, check out F1 2020, which has a very good career mode where you manage and drive for your own F1 team. You'll have to sort out your own sponsors and research and development, which is a really cool concept. For simulators, Assetto Corsa is definitely the best bet if you're on console, and it's also a great option if you're on PC due to modding. Otherwise, iRacing, R-Factor 2 and Race Room are all very good simulators, and I'll link a really good video on the best sim racing titles in the description below. Anyway, that's all for this video. If you have enjoyed it or found it useful, then a like or even a sub would be absolutely amazing. But that's all, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.